Welcome to the Helping Conversation, an exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of facilitating trusting, safe, inclusive, and effective helping conversations with others. The helping conversation is at the core of the sacred partnership between two people when one is there to help the other. Recorded at RockVox Recording and Production Studios, Rochester, New York. Find your voice and broadcast it to the world at RockVox, rockvox.com. And now your host of the Helping Conversation, Keith Greer.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Helping Conversation. Today, as we have done in our previous episodes, we will continue our exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation, defined as any conversation that focuses on supporting a person in the moment and or supporting the overall growth and development of a person, group, or organization. The helping conversation is at the core of that sacred partnership between two or more people or a person and an organization when one has been asked, agrees to, or is empowered to help another. And as we have done in previous episodes, we have a very special guest with us today who we're going to engage in a conversation about his specific and unique brand of helping conversation that he has been facilitating over a 34-year career. So would you join me in welcoming into the studio with us this morning, Rabbi Alan Katz.
Hello, Thank you. Korea goes 44 years, though.
What?
It's just 34 here in Rochester.
Oh, 34 here in Rochester. All right, we have to get the number correct. I do not want to cheat you out of any of those numbers. So let me share with you all a little bit about who Rabbi Katz is and what he has done over those many years. Rabbi Katz has served as the senior rabbi of Temple Sinai here in Rochester since 1986. He just retired a few days ago, June 30th, and has now become Rabbi Emeritus, a graduate of Lehigh University and Hebrew Union College, where he received an MAHL, which is a
Master's in Hebrew Letters.
Hebrew Letters.
Hebrew Literature.
In 1975, rabbinic ordination in 1976, and a Doctor of Divinity in 2001. He also studied in the graduate program for Pastoral counseling at Iona College for 2 years. During the 34 years that he has been a senior rabbi at Temple Sinai, the congregation has grown from under 350 families to its present size of 540 families. Rabbi Katz has served on numerous community activities, including the Greater Rochester Martin Luther King Jr. Commission, the Interfaith Forum, Board of the Hickey Center for Interfaith Study and Dialogue, the Commission on Christian-Jewish Relations, and the Commission of Jewish-Muslim Understanding. In the Jewish community, he has served on the board of the Rochester Jewish Federation and has chaired both the Community Relations Committee and the partnership together with Modi'in, and is presently on the steering committee of the Levine Center to End Hate. He has twice served as president of the Rochester Board of Rabbis. Rabbi Katz was a signatory and a participant in drafting of the Rochester Agreement between the Roman Catholic Diocese, the Jewish Community Federation, and the Rochester Board of Rabbis. He co-led with Bishop Matthew Clarke 2 interfaith missions, one to Israel in 1998 and one to Rome in 2006, where he had the honor of meeting Pope Benedict. On October 4th, 2001, Rabbi Katz was invited to Washington, D.C., to deliver the opening prayer in the U.S. House of Representatives at this very critical time in our nation's life. He has visited Israel 44 times and served on the board of the Association of Reform Zionists of America. He is married to a wonderful, wonderful woman by the name of Jan Katz, who also has been very active in our Jewish community and is presently studying to become a rabbi herself. Jan and the rabbi have 3 children and are blessed with 12 grandchildren. And again, Rabbi, thank you for sitting in with us today.
Welcome.
Just reading that, you have accomplished a lot. And so for me, I am very interested in, because it strikes me that you have done a helping conversation on a bunch of different levels. You could say you have done it individually with congregants, you have done it in leading the organization of Temple Sinai, and you have done a much larger helping conversation in the larger Rochester community and beyond, especially in the world of interfaith. So I am always curious with people about how they got to the profession they got to. So just a little bit of how did becoming a rabbi come true for you?
Well, my quick answer is I loved basketball as a kid. And at the synagogue I grew up in, they had a basketball team, a league they were part of, and it was much better than the recreation leagues in those days. In the recreation leagues, you used to take a T-shirt and write a number on it. This team had, the glittery satin shorts and the uniforms, sort of looked like the old Laker uniforms,
right,
with the gold tops. And so I wanted to be on the team, and you had to join the youth group. So to join the youth group, I became very active. And one of the things that I guess from my parents, if you join something, you do it. You
right.
don't just hang
right.
on. So I became very active in the synagogue life, and I realized that gave me a foundation in my Jewish identity. Those years wasn't sure about God yet, but just the identification as a Jew and a Jewish person in the world, connection to Israel, but didn't think of becoming a rabbi right away. I really thought about the helping profession. My mom was a psychiatric social worker. My sister was a psychiatric social worker. And when I went off to college, I said, maybe I'll become a psychiatrist. Let me tell you, the sciences did not work out very well, and you had to become a doctor first. And so that wasn't going to stay, so you transferred to psychology.
Right.
And but I was thinking of clinical counseling. And then in my junior year, I decided to spend the year in Israel, where I did meet my wife, which was a wonderful year for that reason more than anything else. But and then I had to make a decision. You're coming back. You're going to be a senior at college. What are you going to do with your life? And I liked the idea of helping and counseling and all that, but I also liked this Jewish piece that was so strong for me. And I said, well, I could stay in Israel because I also love Jewish history.
Right.
And I could stay and be a tour guide. Love the land. I could do that, or I could come back. And I had met a couple of Reform rabbis there, which I knew little about. I was in the conservative movement and didn't really understand Reform until I met these two men. And they said, well, look into it. And so I looked into it, and I said, hey, that does both of these things that I want to do. You become a rabbi, but you become a counselor to people.
Yes.
And you're helping people all the time.
Yeah.
And it ties you in with your Jewish identity. And at that point, I was really developing my faith and what my faith meant. And I have an unusual definition, but there's definitely a definition of God. And sometimes the students are shocked when I tell them what I don't believe in, because I said, tell me what you don't believe in. And I said, well, I don't believe in that either. And then they look at me, and I say, well, that's not the God. I have a different understanding. So combining the two, go to rabbinical school, study my understanding of Judaism and all that I love about it, and also work on the counseling. Now, in college, one of the things that helped in the psychology program, I had a wonderful professor whose name now escapes me, as all names do these days. And he was writing a paper, and he was doing two groups of students. One would get specific training, and the other would be the group that didn't get the training. And you would go to a psychiatric hospital, work with people, and see what happens. And at the end, he would measure certain factors. Right. And fascinated me, working with somebody. I mean, I was in a psychiatric hospital and I had one single person and also a small group of people. And I was in the group that wasn't getting training. But I think he found at the end that the training that he could give to people in a short amount of time didn't change the conversations. Right. So that was the first step. And then when I went to rabbinical school, I also decided to, finished my rabbinic degree, to take some more courses in counseling. And I went to Iona College, which also is an interfaith place, because Iona is a Catholic college. And the most wonderful time there was the discussions at the lunch tables with the priests, sisters, ministers. And there was always a rabbi in every class. So if there was 30 people in the class, there was always one rabbi in every class. And, talking about their different approaches. And I remember one of the ministers, who didn't last very long in the program, his approach is if somebody comes to you a problem, you just take them into the sanctuary, you get down on your knees and you pray. I said, that doesn't work for me. Prayer might help, but that's not how you help the problem. So I did that. And it's interesting that one of the people who really influenced me at the time was a Catholic brother, Father Benedict Greshel, who I found out later was a very right-wing Catholic, and I didn't know that about him at the time, because what fascinated about me is his understanding of looking at the other side of things.
Right.
He was hired by the diocese often to check out if somebody was possessed or actually had a psychological problem.
Right.
And to understand that there is a possibility of this deeper sense. I don't know that I believe in possession, and there is possession in Judaism too.
Right.
I don't know if I believed in that, but one of the cases, one of the people that I helped a tremendous amount came to me was saying he was seeing images of demons coming at him and things. And by not denying that he was seeing this, he was able to keep talking to me, and it helped him at the time.
Right.
So that was, an important step.
Right. That's a wonderful example of in my world, we always think about how do you treat somebody as a resource, that when they come in, you treat what they say as their truth, right? And that you start there, and you don't start by denying their truth, because that goes nowhere. Right. And that opens up a certain level of trust. So you've mentioned a couple of people that influenced you. Anyone else on that list as you think about this journey towards becoming a rabbi, or even after you became a rabbi, that has influenced your thinking through the years?
I'm not sure. My mother did the work, but I don't think she influenced me in that area.
Right.
Other areas, in my political activity and my social conscience activity, my parents were great. My whole family structure was set that way. But maybe some of the teachers along the way, but I can't remember specific. When I went to rabbinical school, there were a couple of courses in counseling, and the first one the dean just waved me out of because I had my undergraduate in psychology and did that field service. So So he said, "You don't need me." But there was one course that was a little bit deeper and helped us. And again, in the schooling at Iona, it opened up the readings of some of the councils, which I also did an undergraduate, but just helped me understand a little bit deeper.
Right.
But as individuals, I guess I look around and try to pick up what I can from anybody.
Right.
A learner, as a teacher, I learn from my students, and also by keeping my eyes open, I try to learn from other people.
Right.
Almost everybody has something to teach you, and I won't say everybody because there are times, and in this day and age, there are times when we don't say everybody does it. So I don't have, I can't point to specific people.
Right. So one of the things I'm very curious about. So you mentioned that you grew up in a conservative synagogue. So I'm curious how, when the time came to make this decision about pursuing being a rabbi, why not in the conservative side of things, and what went into moving and saying I'm going to be a rabbi, but in the Reform movement?
The conservative movement at that time had certain requirements on their students that I wasn't ready to live by.
Okay.
I observe Sabbath every week. We make a Sabbath dinner. We pray. I do my praying a little bit early for Sabbath now because I love a service that's being broadcast from Israel, so I get it in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So before I came over, I listened to that service. But they required that you observe Sabbath in a certain way. No driving, no electricity. Right. And that wasn't good for me. The second thing was I hadn't bought into the total concept of kashrut. And they also required their students to sign a degree that they would keep totally kosher.
Okay.
And although our house is totally kosher so that other Jews can come in and eat there, I have not found kashrut to be the meaningful part of Judaism that I need in my life.
Right. Okay. So you're a rabbi, and as you mentioned, a significant part of the work you do is pastoral counseling. So when a congregant comes to you, is there a modality or a model or a series of theories or that guide your work when you are in this position of providing pastoral counseling?
Okay, so it always depends, of course, on the individual and the problem that's presented. Just heard a lecture this week that just blew my mind, and it had to do with empathy to some extent, what's going on, and he quoted people like Sherry Turkle, and that empathy in the United States has gone down 40%.
Wow.
In the last use. And one of the blames is on we're so tied to screens, and so you're not tied to people.
Right.
But one of the solutions that was mentioned is just the necessity of listening.
Yeah.
And you can train yourself in empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And the importance of listening. So, as I said with that first person that I mentioned from years and years ago, I listened to his problem. Well, not his problem, his presentation.
Right.
And so if you can listen and it's focusing on them and listening directly to people, then you can see where they're coming from. I also set boundaries. One of the boundaries is I don't do long-term counseling. I am not a psychiatrist, psychologist. That's not the field I've chosen.
Right.
Crisis information, helping them get to the next step, often recommending people to move on. But I try to deal with the presenting problem. If I could do it in 2 or 3 sessions, or even just 1 session, that's where I stay.
Okay.
I never take somebody to keep coming back to me because that's not where it really works.
Do you think that's a standard shared by other rabbis?
No. Not all. Some do, some don't.
Some do, okay.
And depending, many rabbis do have second degrees in counseling and psychology, and so many of them may take on longer.
Right.
Some go into that field from the rabbinate.
Okay.
So that's it. So the other piece is that, and that was why the Iona courses helped, is how do I incorporate my Jewish heritage and my Jewish learning into the answers and the presentations.
Okay.
And so if something fits, I mention it. Not telling people, I try not to tell people what to do. You know, it's again the counseling model. They have to discover for themselves what they need to do. But often, and I'm shocked at the times of how many times people come back to me with quotes, most of which I probably did say, but you know, some I don't know that I could have ever said, that they remember this one quote I said to them, and that helped them at that moment. So it works. And then sometimes, you know, you can't fix it.
No, you can't. Right.
And so I'm very much aware of that.
Right.
You know, I get couples coming in and they're having problems. Some may be guided in certain directions, some not.
Right.
Pre-wedding couples.
Right.
I've only refused to do 2 based on the what was presented to me when they came in for that. I said, until you get some help and work out certain issues,
Right.
I can't do this wedding because and that doesn't mean that the weddings I've done have all worked out, but it just that wasn't working. So what do they present to you? Do you hear them? Can you open up for them how to look and understand the other person?
Right.
You know, and then there's the other theory is to help people is you can't change the other person, you can change yourself and how you look at the other person.
That's a tough message sometimes.
So that's also, you know, part of the approach I take.
Yeah, yeah. I love that about the listening part. You know, I always find myself in some of the work I do in training coaches and clinicians, people always talk about, well, all I did was just listen. And even just putting that word in there just somehow minimizes the power and the honoring of listening and being present for somebody.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the things I have found, and I probably have ADHD. I mean, I just, you know, my wife said, you know, probably got it, you know, and my daughter, you know, whatever, and my kid, you know, whatever. Some of them have, some not. My wife can sit at a desk for hours upon hours. I can't.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm with you on that.
And do anything. So if I'm in a public space, I am keenly aware of everything that's going on around me. I call it my New York attitude. I can see behind me. I can see the side, so I don't mind walking the streets of New York City in the old days.
Right.
And students couldn't understand how I could know what was going on behind me when I was looking, you know, in a different direction. Right. So I need to be in that quiet space where I can just listen to them, and then it can work. So I'm not a 1-foot counselor, and not even maybe a good listener sometimes, unless I'm focused on my listening.
Sure, sure. So one of the topics I'm really curious about, you know, in addition to the pastoral counseling you do, where maybe it's coming in and it's a specific issue, or, you know, a relationship issue, I'm under the impression people walk in and want to engage with you in this whole conversation about God, what it is, who it is, how it fits into my life, and it's one of the things about Reform Judaism that personally I love the most is we are given permission to question and to not just blindly abide. But tell me a little bit about what some of those conversations are like.
Okay. One of the things people sort of don't get right is Reform Judaism had a stronger God-focused definition, narrower than conservative for a while. Conservative opened up the conversation with different theologies earlier than Reform.
Right.
But now they both have the open conversation. So if you can take away, I think when people have the problem, number one is the problem if the image of the controlling God, that God controls everything in this world, and they don't believe it because they see something and then they want to know why, then at that point, I try to say, well, maybe you don't have to look at God that way. If you want to believe God that way, that's fine, but you may have problems. I want a consistent theology that you can believe in when things go right, when things go wrong. And that's number one. Number two is destroy the image of the old man in the sky with the white beard. Destroy the image, for me, of the personified God, even though there are personifications in the Bible and in the writing about it, because it's the only way the human can describe things.
Right.
But try to get that out of your mind. So God is in relationship. God is in love. God is in, the creative power. God. There are many places you can find God, and then you get to a point also where there's also a possibility of a leap of faith. At some point, and that's my belief, that everybody has a leap of faith, and it's how far you want to take that leap that allows you to think about God. So people come in with spiritual questions, sure.
Right.
I don't believe in this. If it's around a tragedy, why did God do this to me? Why did God do this to my family? So these discussions go in that direction.
Okay.
But it's also, you're asking this question. Did you ask it when your child was born and you just had that joy and that wonderful? Did you ask that question, when, that happiest day in your life, whatever that was? Did you ask where was God then?
Right.
I mean,
right.
But you only ask it when somebody gets sick, somebody dies, there's a tragedy.
Right.
And again, I put things also in a greater historical spin. If I can answer the question about God in the face of the Holocaust, then there's something wrong with my thinking. Right. And so, why does God cause these things to happen? And if God caused them, there's no rationale in my human, from the human.
I like the concept of consistency of theology, that God is there when wonderful stuff is happening, and God is there when wonderful stuff isn't, when painful stuff is happening.
Right.
So I'm curious, though, about what you said a moment ago about this leap of faith. So I just want to make sure I'm wrapping my head around that. So I'm in this conversation with you about God, and I may be one of those people who has held on a long time to the guy with the beard in the sky, that there's no way that we can have an intellectual conversation about this that won't, at the end of it, potentially require me to do a leap of faith.
I think so. Now, let's say God is in relationship, and even in relationship, there's a leap of faith.
Right.
Go back. Can science prove the beginning? Well, there was something before that. That's the leap of faith.
Right.
So there may be smaller leaps in some people's mind. I mean, a leap of faith. Can God come down and give the Ten Commandments to 600,000, probably 2 to 3 million people, in the desert who left Egypt, which, if you believe it, that's fine. But I can't follow that.
Right.
So there are different ways to do that. So what I mean leap of faith is I'm a fairly rational person. I look for rationality in things, reasons, cause, effect. But there's at a certain point, I say, this is just beyond the rationality. Right. I'll give you an example. I don't pray to God to cure somebody's illness.
Right.
I pray to give the strength, to give the, the hope, all that, and to bring the comfort.
Right.
I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. Many, many years ago, and thank God she's still with us, my sister, so we're talking about 20 years ago, came down with ovarian cancer before they've done some good work in that area. She, the news hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was going to Israel right after I heard the news, And I went to a place where I don't usually do my praying. I usually do my praying in synagogues, not at the Western Wall, which many others do their praying at. I don't think it's a local call there in the long distance other places. So I went to the wall to pray for my sister's health.
Yeah.
That was a leap of faith.
Yeah.
It was taking away the rational me who was always there and always thought about it,
Right.
and yet it was my sister, my emotions. I needed to do that.
Right.
Did that mean that I believe God could cure her at that time? I don't know, but it was just that I needed to be there at that moment.
Right. Yeah. So I'm hearing the leap of faith is about connection and not about that I believe this godlike character can do magic.
Right.
That's not a
that
part of it.
just doesn't work for me.
Right. So I'm curious because you said a few moments ago when we started the conversation that sometimes when you have conversations with some of the students, they're a little bit taken aback by your take on all of this. What is that take that might be surprising to people?
Oh, well, like, did God talk to Abraham and doesn't talk to me? I said, no, God talks to you the same way God talked to Abraham or to Moses. I don't think there's a change in God. I think there's a change in the way humans describe the stories.
Right.
And so, well, how could you believe that, Rabbi? You're the rabbi. God gave you the whole Torah. Humans try to. My concept of that is that it's the human struggle to understand what God wants of them, and the Jewish form of that is Torah.
Right.
It's not necessarily God giving. Now, is there God inspiration? Perhaps. I don't know for the people who wrote it down.
Right.
Was it one person to me? No. So when I take away these things that they thought they learned, and unfortunately, when you have teachers in your religious school, they often come in with other kinds of knowledge and belief.
Right.
And it's not always at the level that I have. And so they've been taught things that I don't believe in.
Right.
And then the student comes to me in 10th grade, they're 15, 16 years old, and they say, well, I can't believe in this story. I said, oh, tell me the story. Fine, I don't believe in that. And then I give them another thing. How do you read the story in another way? How do you read the story in another way? What's going on? Was there really an Adam and Eve? I said, does it matter? The story is true. What do you mean it's true, Rabbi, if it didn't happen? Because the truths are what you learn from it.
Right. Yeah. So before we move on to talking about some of the ways you've engaged in a helping conversation on a more systemic level, I'm curious about one other specific conversation that I know you're in with congregants, and this is near and dear to my heart because of who I'm married to, and that is when a human being shows up in your office considering conversion to Judaism, because I think that is just such an intimate moment for people who either were raised with no faith or a different faith, considering moving towards a new faith. What's that conversation like?
Well, the first thing I asked them to do is to give me their spiritual history as best they can. What was it growing up? What was their parents? How did it mean? What did they believe when? What was important? So I get some people who come in. I'm just thinking one individual in our congregation who came in with just loved going to church. Just loved it. Loved the singing. Loved this. And then later on lost that connection to some of the basic teachings of the church.
Right.
So I said, well, have you looked at the church another way? Have you talked to, I don't try to say, yeah, come on over to Judaism. We want you. We don't. It's not that we don't want you. I want to make sure you really want to make this step. There's a teaching in Judaism, you're supposed to push somebody away 3 times before you accept them to study conversion.
Really?
I don't do it quite that way. What I do is I don't make the calls.
Yeah.
They have to make the calls. They don't call me for a month for an appointment. I don't call them, where are you?
Right.
So that's when I know the real sincerity. I may be missing a few people that way, but I'm sure I get the sincerity a lot better. So that's number one. Number two is, what are you looking for in this, your explanation of Judaism? What do you know about Judaism? Some of them know quite a bit, some of them don't. Some come from families that are already connected with Judaism. And then there are others who come in and says, look, I did a little reading, and it seems to be someplace I want to go. And so then we explore it, and then we have to study. But again, I want to open up. I said, you're going to come up with, and you're allowed to, different beliefs than I have.
Right.
But it's how do you connect, and so it's part of that. Second thing is, with them, is Judaism isn't simply a faith. Christianity is a faith. Islam really is a faith. Judaism is a combination of the faith piece and the peoplehood piece.
Right.
And it's you buying into community as well as your faith. You can't be Jewish alone. We don't have, they may have been a couple historically, but we don't have Jewish monks who isolate themselves away from society.
Right.
We must be part of society, and part of our society is our Jewish community.
Right.
It's very hard to be Jews alone, and so when, like, when I think about American Jewish history, and as Jews moved to other parts of the country in the settlement days, they were alone. It was very hard for them, and many of them lost their Judaism and the next generation of Judaism because of that. Until other Jews joined them and they could create community along with it. Right. So I want them to think about that aspect. What does it mean communally? And sometimes it's family. Yeah. Sometimes it's family, and that's fine. That's fine. Sometimes it's just deep faith that they want to believe in somebody. I remember years ago. He's since passed on. There was a man who grew up Catholic, and he didn't want to be Catholic, and he and his wife tried Unitarian, and what he missed was ritualism. Right. And Judaism contains the combination. So, to understand that you can't just be Jewish on social, you want to have social values, social justice values, which we teach a lot of, and I'm very active in that. That's a fundamental piece of my Judaism. That's fine, but if you don't do anything ritualistically, why do you need to be Jewish?
Right.
You got to bring some of that. What you bring in, and that's the difference between Reform and Conservative. And Orthodox is, I don't say you have to bring it all in at once. I don't have to bring it all in.
Right.
Okay, you Shabbat, it's a very key concept, Sabbath.
Yeah.
Right? It may just be lighting candles on Friday night.
Right.
It may just be having that special dinner on Friday night. I remember couples where they were converting, and before they had children, and they would come to services, and they'd go out to a restaurant afterwards. And somebody says, well, that's not a Shabbat dinner. And what do you mean it's not a Shabbat dinner? They're doing this purposely to celebrate Shabbat together, be with each other, come to service, or not even come to service. I remember another family where she said, well, on Friday night, we turn off the tube. Those are the days where they didn't have as many screens. They turn off the tube, and we order in pizza and play games. That's Shabbat? Why not?
Why not?
Why not?
Right.
If you're doing it dedicated to this is a day of difference, of rest, of stop, of renewal of self, of concentrating on other things, family, connection to the world and God.
So back to that concept of, again, treating people as the best resource in their own life, that they get to have these definitions of how this fits into their life, what it's going to look like. And it's not anybody's place to look in and judge based on, well, this is what Shabbat is for me, so you can't call it Shabbat if you're doing it differently.
But there's another piece, and that is there are some no-nos. There are some negatives, and you can't do the negatives. Right. You can't come in to me and say, I want to believe in Jesus, I want to hold on to my belief in Jesus and still be Jewish. I can't. There are some who, in another another place, some who do that. I can't do that. That's not part of it. Right. So, there are some things you just can't do.
Right. Yeah, that's a pretty big cornerstone of the faith. Yeah. Is that perspective on that historical person of Jesus?
Right, but learn from Jesus. I study the New Testament occasionally. Yeah. I mean the Christian Bible. Yeah. To see what it's saying, how to understand it. And I have a very dear friend, Professor Joe Kelly, who has shown me over the years how some of the Gospels are written by Jews for Jews.
Right.
And if you read it in that way, you see something else. So I learned from it.
Yeah.
Was Jesus a great teacher? Was Jesus a prophet in some way with a small p in my mind?
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. But, it's just not a God figure and doesn't come to that nature.
Right. Yeah, I relate to this. As you know, I grew up with a mom who just turned 90, who grew up in an Orthodox family. To this day, the ritual part of Judaism is incredibly important to her and meaningful. Grew up with a dad who, born Jewish, but parents didn't practice, who through his life would say it was the peoplehood part that he was intimately connected to and very important and meaningful in his life. And found myself somewhere in the middle of those two things.
Yeah, well, I try to say, can you combine?
Yeah,
so there's the peoplehood, there's the ritual, and then there's the social behavior.
Yeah.
And that's another piece to me. That you work them together.
Right. So let's talk about that, because you have been an absolute leader for many, many years here in the Rochester area and beyond in the world of interfaith. And that's a whole nother level of systemic helping to foster those conversations. So what has that part of your rabbinic career been like?
Okay, so I was fortunate to grow up with my family because my parents were open, accepting, and welcoming to all kinds of people. Early Passover Seder's, we had African-American friends of my parents in the house. We had Italian-American Catholics, our next-door neighbors. We would go over and help them decorate a Christmas tree, and they would come over and light the Hanukkah. And the first, as I say, one of my classic stories, and if you're a congregant, you know this one is my first interfaith service was Frankie Palmieri came over. It was the spring vacation right after Easter. I guess the chick he got for Easter died. Has anybody ever done a chicken funeral? So the Katzes and the Palmieri kids all went out in the backyard and did a chicken funeral. That's a piece of it. But there are a number of things that are important to me. Number one is on the personal level, the teaching that every human being is created in the image of God. And so I don't care what religion, what faith, what culture, everybody's created in the image of God. Number two is, before it became popular recently, I was the one who would say at these meetings, I don't want to use the word tolerance.
Yeah.
I want to appreciate.
Yeah.
Now, it's popular now, but when I started saying this was not, religious tolerance, great, that's not it.
Yeah.
And it's why, like, for example, it's not passively, I'm not racist, but I have to be an anti-racist.
Right.
You can't just be tolerant, you have to appreciate. But appreciation also, to me, learns that I want to listen to you, learn what you have to say. I don't have to adopt it.
Right.
I don't have to believe in it.
Right.
But I can appreciate it. What does it mean to you?
Right.
Third point that was always important to me. If there is one God, it doesn't matter how you describe it or how you name it.
Right.
If there is one God, then the Christian God or, Trinity,
Right.
Allah for the Muslims,
Right.
the Hindu pantheon.
Yeah.
If there's one God, there's one God.
God.
And
Right.
so it's for all of us. It's just we describe it, we get there in different paths. And then you study then it becomes cultural, and there are aspects of it, and those can be so beautiful. I'm a New Yorker, and I have some bad New York habits. And one of the bad New York habits I had was, until I got to Rochester, I didn't want to go very far west of New Jersey, unless you got all the way
Nothing exists far west of New Jersey.
unless you get to California. So the placement director, when I started looking for a pulpit, wanted me to interview in Iowa. And I said, I don't want to spend the rest of my life eating white bread. Now, that's a prejudice. I know it. I apologize to all you Iowans. And one of my best friends from medical school, served in Iowa and did a great job. And it's much more ethnically diverse than I ever imagined. I just didn't see it. I didn't know. I was ignorant. But it's the mixture of things that I love. I love to hear other people's music. I love to hear see other people's art. And therefore, I also like to hear their religious ceremonial presentations. And that enlightens me.
Right.
I'm not going to do it that way. That's not my belief.
Right.
But I can appreciate if there's beauty in it, there's aesthetic beauty, or meaning in it for you. If there's meaning in it for you, what is the meaning in it for you?
Right.
And so when I go into a interfaith dialogue, and I have that respect for the other people, and they know me in this community, I don't hold back. I don't, if somebody says something and I don't, they don't get away with things easily, but at the same time, they know I appreciate them, respect them for who they are, and, we can then dialogue.
Yeah, yeah. What were the conversations like with Matthew Bishop Clarke through the years?
I'm sorry what's happening right now because, it's a terrible story that's happening. Matthew was just a gentle, kind, thoughtful individual.
Yeah.
And he wasn't involved in the original creation of the document where the communities worked together. He had other people do that, and I worked with some other priests and teachers, Father Joe Brennan of blessed memory, Father Joe Hart, people who, in the intellectual grappling. But being with Matthew is like, he generated an openness and a love of people that just you had to feel.
Right.
I mean, that's what I believe. So it was there. And I remember some of the problems he got into with the greater church was that he was trying to be open. I mean, his welcoming of the GLBTQ community, saying mass for them and not throwing them out of the church. And I think he was wrestling with the women's issue too, but, he had people above him.
Yeah.
It's a hierarchical organization, which Judaism isn't.
Right.
So, for example, when I told the congregation that I was going to do same-sex weddings well before it was legal, I wasn't asking for permission.
Right.
And I didn't have any organizational structure above me in terms of my Reform Judas movement.
Right.
Yes, the board could fire me if I was doing something wrong, but not something wrong, something they didn't like.
Right.
But I also was blessed with going to a congregation where when I presented this, one of the older gentlemen who was a founder, kept waving, I want to say something, I said, I don't need you to say something, I don't want any argument. This is what, he says, I want us to back Rabbi Katz 100% and the board backed me 100%. Right. So on those critical issues, yes, there are people in the congregation who don't always agree with some of the things. No question. And the individuals. So we've dealing with now with Black Lives Matter. Right. We've dealt with pride, over the years. We've dealt with interfaith marriage over the years. That there is a bigger divide. And so, but it was the respect they gave and acceptance. Right. So it's I remember once giving a sermon on the High Holy Days. Again, the conversation is you have to know who your audience is. When I preach, I really try to think, what does the opposition think, the person who's not agreeing with what I'm saying have to do? So I gave it was a time when New York State was trying to adopt the 10-point women's program, and every 9 points were really easy, and the 10th point had to do with bringing us in line with Roe versus Wade, as opposed to the New York, which was first and early. And right. By the way, the deciding vote in the New York State legislature was the father of a guy who was in rabbinical school with me. It was very interesting, from I think the Syracuse area, and so. That was one woman's issue. And the second woman's issue was the access to holy sites in Israel, the praying at the wall. So I gave this high holiday sermon, figuring the women's at the wall wouldn't get any feedback. But I didn't think I'd get any feedback on the abortion issue, the choice. Not abortion, the choice. Right, choice. I had a congregant family who quit. I said, what did I say? One of the things I said, but they didn't hear, and this is, again, you learn how people, it's not what you say, right. It's the what meaning they derive hear. From it. Right. And I said, in this argument, there are people on the other side who have moral stands, ethical stands against why they do not want to give women the choice for abortion. Right. They may think it's murder. I don't define it that way because we have a definition of when life begins and things like that. And I said it very clearly that I'm not calling them right. immoral, right. unethical. I don't agree with them. And there was one other piece, but they didn't like that I used pro-choice and anti-abortion. They wanted pro-life and pro-abortion. Right. I mean, and it was different, but that's what happens. Right.
Look, I know from my conversations with you, this line you've had to walk as the senior rabbi, heading up an organization that is steeped in social action, and yet, as it says, 540 families, that's a lot of people with a range of opinions and attitudes, especially along the political spectrum, and finding that place where you can speak your heart and what you believe Reform Judaism stands for, knowing that not everybody's going to agree.
Right. And that's again, in organizational work,
right.
in board work with the congregation, and right. in personal counseling.
Yeah.
So it's, with personal, you don't have to offer your opinion necessarily. I mean, that's not what it is. But it's the idea of what might they be thinking that's sort of in opposition to what you're thinking. Right. And how do you come about, what do you learn from that? How can you accept it?
Right.
What can you find in that conversation? So that's part of the difficulty of keeping a conversation going where it's very difficult. One of the places I have the greatest difficulty is on the issue of Israel.
Yeah.
And that is, my credentials of loving Israel, very few people question it. Although I once Googled myself in the early days and found I was on an Israel haters list.
Wow.
Why? Because I don't disagree that the Palestinians have rights and should
Yeah.
be treated as individuals.
Right.
And some of the people don't know. They think I'm just I'm intolerant of other points of view. I'm not intolerant of other points of view. But to walk that line in our congregation,
Yeah.
where there are people who you say anything slightly negative about Israel,
Right. You
and then
hate
the
Israel.
people who say anything positive about Israel, the same thing.
Right.
And then walk it and sort of keep them all discussing. But when I sit in the conversations, I've had some very difficult conversations with some of the people who are very critical of Israel.
Right.
And the reason is I can support that there should be a Palestinian entity, that it's not been offered to them in the fair way. I also see reasons of why, but I can't take it when the other person on the other side says to me, Israel has no right to exist.
Right.
Israel is only evil. Israel only... Look, maybe the government is at times,
Yeah.
but it's not all. They don't know all the peace organizations in Israel
Right.
that I hang out with. I mean, that they
Right.
just don't see that
Right.
peace. So it goes on both sides.
Right.
So there are two different places. If I'm in a group of sort of liberal Protestants and Muslims, I seem like a right winger.
Yeah.
If I'm in the group, let's say, with some of the establishment leadership in the Jewish community, that especially on Israel, I'm a left-wing radical.
Right. Right.
And I sort of move in that direction during the conversation because I don't want to take their position without challenging some of the
Right.
ideas in the position.
Right.
That's where I say I don't hold back.
Right.
So if they say something, then then I'm a little bit too left there, and then I'm a little bit too right here, and I don't want to be there.
It's a balance beam you're walking.
Yeah, so
It's a
you're
balance
walking
beam.
that.
Right.
And I think that's part of your, you said, how do you foster the conversations? That's part of the fostering the
Yeah.
conversation. If you know that that's the case.
Right.
So there are certain models of dialogue that I've been very impressed with. The circles. Somebody taught me
Listening
the, what was it called? The Claremont dialogue,
Right.
where you go around, you don't speak until everybody's spoken.
Right.
You don't question them. You
Right.
only deal with your issue.
Right.
And so that's allows the dialogue to occur. And then if you listen,
Right.
I mean, the thing is, the person speaks, and then nobody speaks for a minute.
That's hard
You're
for us
not-
human beings to do.
You're not planning your
What you're saying
retort
back.
because
Right.
it's going around the circle.
Right. 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 Some of the work that I do in how to very quickly attend to creating trust and safety in any helping conversation talks about that. Talks about that if you, while maybe your client is talking to you or other person is talking to you, you're formulating your response. You're not listening.
Right.
Our brain can't do both. It just can't.
And it's hard to do.
And that's really hard to do. It's really hard to do. But what I like about what you're saying is this concept of appreciation. That appreciation doesn't mean we have to agree. It does denote I'm going to listen, I'm going to think, I'm going to be courageous enough to do some self-introspection about where I'm at. I don't have to necessarily adopt it, but I can still appreciate, celebrate it, and see how deeply meaningful it is to you, right? So those are all some pretty phenomenal skills that you bring to the work that you do. So before we start to wrap this up, because I'm aware of the time here, other skills, talents, positive attributes that you believe have served you well in doing this work for all the years that you have done it?
I don't know. I've been lucky. I've been lucky in many ways. I don't think I'm a know-it-all.
Right.
Although at times I sit in things and somebody gives a lecture on something, I say, I knew that. I've been lucky to have this congregation for this long, where I was at a previous congregation where it wouldn't have worked out. I could have never. And the man who succeeded me is still there.
Right.
He was young, he's still there. I mean, I'm just amazed. It just wouldn't have worked for me. You have to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Second thing is I have a wife who keeps me humble. I deliver a sermon. I think it's great, and congregants think it's great. And she says, you did, you said this, or you misused the English word, or whatever it is. So sometimes I don't appreciate it, but in the end, I do appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I think everybody needs that partner.
Yeah.
That partner who keeps them humble and yet is supportive.
Right.
Really supportive in the end.
Right.
I mean, we're married 50 years, so there must be something right there.
Yeah.
And I'm not bringing it to the table.
Look, that's that's to me another piece of a very effective helping conversation is that I can do that with you. I can love you and care for you and respect for you, and there's enough trust and safety between us that I can point some things out. I can give you some constructive feedback at times, and there's space within our relationship to allow all of that to happen.
Right. So with some congregants, when they come to you, you have that.
Right.
You're trusted. You're a safe place. With some, you're not yet.
Right.
And they have to develop that along the way, and then
Right.
and time comes, and it's like you celebrated this with them, or you mourned with them, or you cried with them at another time. So that's when you develop it, and then they're willing to listen to you when you say something. Did you think of it this way? You might be on the wrong track.
Yeah.
Take a look at it, and then they're willing to accept it. You do that with somebody you hardly know.
Right.
Get it. You
No,
don't have a
no,
chance.
Right. That space hasn't been created. Yeah. I've seen the picture, so talk a little bit about what it was like to meet the Pope.
Well, I can't be fully honest here because it was a very special moment. It wasn't a personal meeting in the sense of I didn't have an audience with the Pope.
Right.
And that was pointed out to me by, again, an arrogant rabbi, another rabbi, who said, well, did you go into his church? I said, no, we were standing outside. We heard the thing. He mentioned Rochester, New York 3 times in his general to the tens of thousands of people in St. Peter's. But then Bishop Clarke walks around with him, and he comes up, and he says, this is Rabbi Alan J from Rochester. One of the things I remember is how soft his hands were. Very soft and gentle. And the other thing is I remember there were 3 of us there at the time, the president of the Federation and the executive director of the Federation. And the executive director wasn't there because this little nun from who knows where elbowed him out of the way so she could get up and meeting him. So in that sense, but it was the idea of I'm meeting a world leader.
Yeah.
Agree, disagree,
Yeah.
That's not the issue. I'm meeting a world. And with most world leaders, that would work. There are a few presently, or in the past, that wouldn't. I mean, it was like I did also that opening prayer in Congress. I did it a month after 9/11, right? October of 2001.
Yeah.
And Louise Slaughter, blessed memory, invited me because of the work I had done in the community. And it was a sense of, I don't do prayers at public political events.
Right.
Twice I did because of the moment. This one, once somebody got me to give a prayer when Governor Mario Cuomo was in town, and I wasn't going to do it. I said, I don't need to. This is not my thing. And he said, well, you can bring your kids. And so my kids got to meet the governor.
Yeah.
But this was a sense of the honor that I'm standing in Congress with the 5 people who are in the room so far, because they're not in there, but I'm going to be in the congressional record and so on. Right. It was just such an honor that just sort of overwhelmed me.
Yeah.
And Washington, we couldn't, Washington was all boarded up. I mean, not boarded up, barriered up.
Right.
So the only ones we had down there was my parents, my brother, and Jan. I didn't even have my kids with me.
Yeah.
But it was a very touching moment.
Beautiful. So my last question always is to my guests that if there is someone out there right now that is considering your profession, is considering becoming a rabbi, words of wisdom that you would provide that person at this moment in our time?
I don't know that I would go into the rabbinate now, this time. I think things have changed a great deal. There's a great deal of change has occurred. One is, you need at that point, you need a sense of faith and your commitment to the Jewish people. You know there's going to be intellectual struggles. There are different paths. You know, it's the congregational rabbinate or not. Talk to other rabbis.
Yeah.
Find out what's rewarding for them,
Right.
and then you can make your decision. But think about it. This is not a simple choice, and it may come later in life. My wife.
Yeah, right.
I was just looking something up. There was a woman who was ordained. She was a Holocaust survivor, but she was, I think, 68.
Wow.
Jan will be 72. I wonder if there's been anybody else, but that's a little late. But there are a lot of second career people and third career people. But really, talk to others, observe, try to know yourself as best you can when you go into it, to know what you want, and then it can change. I went in thinking I would do only youth work and education. I moved on, and as I aged, I love working with the seniors.
Yeah.
They're my contemporaries.
Yeah.
So it changes. It changes, but so. You know, you have to know yourself to go into it.
Yeah. I know there's not one answer to the question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The greatest reward of a long career as a rabbi leading, in this case, Temple Sinai.
The greatest reward, whether it's Temple Sinai or any other temple, is knowing at times that your presence and what you do is unique and makes the difference.
Yeah. I hear you. That's powerful. Well, Rabbi Alan Katz, thank you. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you for being here and making the time, and all the best.
Thank you for inviting me.
Move on into retirement and whatever is next for you and Jan. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Well, that's the end of our podcast for today. I hope that you found this conversation with Rabbi Alan Katz meaningful and thought-provoking, and please come back and check out the next episode of The Helping Conversation as we continue to explore and celebrate the practice, art, and science of the Helping Conversation. Have a great day.
We thank you for sitting in on our discussion today on just one unique version of the Helping Conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's podcast, so we sincerely invite you to follow, rate, and most importantly, review our episodes. Please join us for our next episode as we continue the exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the Helping Conversation.